Let's try to broach the topic of compression. I remember when I first started mixing and making music, recording, compression was one of those things you have to really train your ear to pay attention to. It is not it's not a distortion pedal, it's not a delay, it's not reverb, it's not something that's so obvious, or EQ for that matter, when you can be really drastic with EQ. Compression is very subtle. It is more of a control utility mechanism as opposed to a massive coloration utility, although some compressors will also color the signal. Really important concept to think of when we're talking about compression is the term dynamic range. Essentially, the distance between loud and quiet amplitude points. So when looking at a waveform, you have the transients, or these super loud points, and you have lower points. That's called the dynamic range. Hey, music itself can have a dynamic range. Orchestral music, for example, that there's going to start with quiet passages. Maybe it's the flute section, then all of a sudden, the timpanis and the strings and everything hits. That is another use of the term dynamic range. In audio, in the kind of engineering side of it, we're literally talking about the distance between the loud sections of a signal and the quiet sections of a signal. Compression aims to kind of quiet or attenuate, to make quieter these louder peaks in order to allow the quieter peaks to be more audible. Okay? So we're boosting the quieter parts in essence by attenuating or quieting the louder parts. So when you look at a compressed signal, you're kind of taking these loud sections and you're saying, hey, if this dotted line is our threshold, we are going to compress you, we're going to squeeze you into a narrower dynamic range. It's a control mechanism. So we're going to talk about the parameters. And by the way, this is the Dyne 3. This is kind of the stock Pro Tools compressor, kind of more of a utility than anything else. There are some much nicer sounding compressors that do add some coloration, that give something, even analog emulations. But for now, we'll use this. There are emulations of is it the 1176, the Uri, and we have this DeKing in the studio, which we use to kind of protect from loud spikes when we're recording. And this mic pre, the 710 from Universal Audio, also has built-in compressors. But we're going to concentrate on this thing. So the threshold, like in any Dynamics plugin that's based on, a volume threshold is, it's only going to go to work. The compressor is only going to go to work when a signal passes that threshold in amplitude. Why is this thing capitalized? That bugs me. Okay, so looking at our session, I actually am going to demonstrate this, and I don't always do this, but I'm going to talk about compression on the kick drum and the snare drum because our drummer is awesome, but there's some variation, and we want to kind of have a little bit more consistent of a kick drum. Okay, so we have our gated kick and EQ'd kick for that matter. And I don't want to get into EQ first, compression second, compression first, EQ. That is another debate for another day. I'm going with it. So threshold. When is the compressor can actually go to work. If I raise this, that's effectively no compression. Okay, and you can see the attenuation meter here. So I was down at about minus 27, I believe, if I paid attention. You get to a section that's a little bit more consistent. So these are other reasons sometimes where we don't always do this, because at different parts of the song, you have different dynamics. Okay, so we're getting about, let me lower this again. I don't want to get too crazy, but you can see that there's only a little bit of hit on some of them and a lot on others. So we're really going to try and bring this kick to be more consistent. At the moment, though, you can also hear that we're kind of squashing it, so we're going to have to be careful. All right, let's talk about the other parameters. The ratio, it's how much compression are we actually using. So at a 2-to-1 ratio, it means that when the signal goes above the threshold by 2 dBs, we're going to push it down to 1 or by 1. So at 2-to-1, 8 dBs above the threshold, we're going to push it down to 4. Again, a fairly standard starting point is about 4-to-1. If you want to get more drastic, and we'll experiment, we'll see. I'm going to turn off the gate. Okay. Again, going back to that gate thing, it takes a long time to sculpt the right sound, and sometimes I don't use gates a whole lot. I wanted to show it to you. Not sure I'm going to use it in my final mix. All right, so we got our ratio. Fairly high right now, actually. Similar, you're going to see a lot of these same parameters. Attack. How fast is the compressor going to hit the signal? And this is a really important one with compression, like it was with gating. We want to let the transient through. We don't want to cut it off. So we don't want too quick of an attack. Listen. Now, it might be even a little bit hard to hear, but I can certainly hear that we're getting more of the drum when we have a slower attack, but we're still getting the compression on the tail. Not gonna lie, that sounds a lot better. Okay, so what else? The release, how long the compressor stays open, and knee is kind of, check this out. If I click on the knee, see how it is kind of softening the slope of the compression, how quickly it acts. And if you're using, slower sounds, longer sustains, like vocals or a piano or such, having a nice ramp of the attenuation might be nice. All right, so we're getting some more attack out of it, getting most of the bottom end still. Last thing I want to talk about is gain. Gain compensation is really, really important. Because you are attenuating, you are making the signal quieter, it is really important to equalize the signal after going through the compressor with gain. Some fancier compressors do auto gain compensation, but it's important to understand the concept. If this were down at 0, you can hear how much louder the bypass the signal is without the compressor. So after the compressor, what we want to do is we want to match these volumes. One of the biggest mistakes beginning mixers make is having the gain higher and thinking that the louder signal is better, because we're naturally thinking that loudness is bestest. So again, just kind of looking over these parameters and my settings, they are kind of different than when I walked in. Looking at the snare, I wanted to play around with the same idea of having a consistent snare drum hit. Check these out if you want. I'm pretty happy with the gate on the snare drum. All right, now where else would we use compression? Many places. Where else will we use EQ? Many places. Bass, we definitely want to have a nice solid bass. We'll eventually talk about side chaining the kick to the bass to make space for the bass when the kick is hitting at the same time. Probably not a whole lot of compression on the guitars, especially guitars that are distorted are already fairly compressed by the nature of compression itself. But yeah, let's start there.